I'm a 27-year-old woman, and this story starts with something that seemed small, just a little fatigue. At first, I chalked it up to long work hours or not eating properly. But then the bruises started showing up, big ones, without any reason. They didn't fade. Then came the nosebleeds, completely random and hard to stop. One even started in the middle of a client meeting, and I had to excuse myself in embarrassment. I finally booked an appointment with a general physician. He checked me over, asked a few questions, and ordered some blood tests. He told me they'd call if anything stood out. I didn't think much of it. At the time, I was staying with my parents for a weekend visit. My phone had died, so I used their landline for a few calls. I remember laughing about how I'd forgotten my charger like a teenager going home from college. About a week later, my parents' landline rang while I was upstairs napping. My mother answered it. Later that evening, she casually mentioned the doctor had called and said everything was completely normal. She smiled and told me not to stress, that it was probably just fatigue or minor vitamin deficiencies. I took her word for it. She was calm, reassuring. There was no sign that anything was wrong. Over the next few weeks, my symptoms got worse. I fainted in the bathroom at work. One time I stood up too fast and hit the floor so hard I cracked my phone screen. A coworker found me and insisted on driving me to urgent care. They ran a new set of tests and requested my old medical records for comparison. I waited in a cold exam room, scrolling my phone and trying to distract myself. When the nurse practitioner returned, she didn't ask any questions. She pulled up a chart on her tablet, showed me the results, and said, "You were diagnosed with early-stage leukemia 3 weeks ago." I blinked at her. I told her there must be a mistake. I hadn't heard anything like that. She looked confused and tapped her screen a few times. Then she pointed to a scanned copy of the lab report. It had my full name and the date. It was faxed to my doctor, and a note was scribbled at the bottom, "Patient notified. Family contacted." I asked who exactly had been contacted. The nurse said the record showed a call had been made to my listed number, and that someone identifying themselves as my mother received the information. I left the clinic holding a printed copy of the lab report, the diagnosis, the timestamp, the log that proved someone else had taken that phone call. I got home, my legs shaking. My mother was in the kitchen cooking. I didn't wait. I put the report on the table in front of her. She froze. I asked her why she hadn't told me, why she'd lied. She looked cornered. Her eyes darted toward the door like she was looking for an escape. Then she started explaining that they didn't want to scare me, that I'm sensitive and dramatic and would have panicked. She said she thought she could ease me into it once I seemed more stable. I was still trying to process what she meant by that when my father walked in. I told him what had happened, and instead of being shocked, he nodded like they had rehearsed their answers. He said it was for my own good, that too much stress would only make me worse. I asked them who else knew. My mother hesitated, then said she had told my older brother. Then she admitted she also told her sister. She had made them promise not to say anything to me. So, 3 people in my family knew. 3 people had looked at me, spoken to me, watched me faint, and said nothing. They'd watched me go to work, collapse, cry in pain, and never once thought I deserved to know the truth. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just picked up the paper from the kitchen table and walked upstairs to pack my things. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lab report. I saw the fake smile my mother gave me when she told me everything was fine. I saw my father nodding in agreement like this was something normal, something protective. They didn't act out of love. They acted to control the narrative. They decided that the possibility of me reacting badly was worse than me being able to take action on a life-threatening illness. They took away 3 crucial weeks of time that I should have spent starting treatment. By morning, I had called a ride share to take me back to my apartment. I changed my number. I made sure my voicemail was disabled. I didn't know what I would do next exactly, but I knew one thing with full certainty: I couldn't trust them anymore. This wasn't just a mistake. It was betrayal, and I had no intention of pretending otherwise. The morning after I left my parents' house, I sent one message to my mother, father, brother, and aunt. I told them I knew what they had done, that I needed space, and that I didn't want any further contact. No long explanations, no open door, just clarity. Then I turned off my phone and focused on practical steps. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and started updating my medical information. I removed my parents from every emergency contact form. I added my best friend and one of my colleagues. Then I called the urgent care clinic that had broken the news and asked them to refer me to an oncologist. They sent a list within an hour, and I picked one who could see me by the end of the week. During the first consultation, the oncologist reviewed the paperwork and asked why treatment had been delayed. I told her I had just found out. She looked confused, then concerned. She didn't press. Instead, she immediately sent me for additional labs and imaging and booked me into her next available slot for a treatment planning session. I left the hospital that day with a binder of information, a schedule of appointments, and a sense that I finally had a path forward. I told my best friend everything. I didn't hold anything back. She listened without interrupting, then hugged me and said she was going to every single appointment with me, no matter what. The next morning, she showed up at my apartment with a backpack, a cooler of snacks, and a notebook to take notes at my doctor's visits. She didn't ask permission. She just did it. That week, I wrote a long entry on my private blog. I didn't name anyone, but I detailed the timeline, how the results came in, how they were intercepted, and how I only found out by chance after nearly collapsing. I wrote it for myself at first, just to get it out, but a few close friends read it and shared it quietly within our circle. Messages started trickling in. Some people reached out to ask if it was true. One friend said she had heard from my brother a few days earlier that I was taking a break and going through something dramatic. Another said she had been told I was burned out and had gone silent for mental health reasons. Then a mutual friend told me she had confronted my brother, asking why I hadn't been told about the diagnosis. He got defensive and claimed I was exaggerating to punish the family. A few hours later, I got a text from him. He called me vindictive. He accused me of turning people against them. I blocked his number without replying. I emailed my doctor that same day, letting her know he was not to be given any updates, ever. The next day, I received a message from a cousin. She apologized and said she had no idea any of this had happened. According to her, she had been told I was dealing with a nervous episode and had asked for space. That was the first time I fully realized this wasn't just silence, it was manipulation. My parents were creating a story and spreading it to cover what they had done. I found a lawyer that week. I explained everything in detail, including the miscommunication with the hospital and my family's attempts to control the flow of medical information. She told me to establish legal control over my care immediately. We drew up a healthcare proxy. I named my best friend and my colleague, giving them full authority in case of emergency. I also asked about restricting access to my medical records. She walked me through the process and gave me sample language to send to each provider I'd ever visited. We also started a documentation folder in case further action was needed. I posted a short message on my personal social media account, nothing dramatic, just that I was in treatment and was thankful for those who had supported me. I didn't assign blame. I didn't name names. I simply made the truth available to anyone who cared to look. That night, my work phone rang. I hadn't given the number to anyone in my family, so I was surprised to see a voicemail pop up. It was from my mother. Her voice was shaking. She said she was sorry, that she had only done what she thought was best, and that I was destroying the family by sharing our private business. She said people were starting to talk and that I was making things worse. I didn't listen to the rest. I deleted the message, then called my lawyer the next morning to log it. She advised me to keep track of all contact attempts and document everything moving forward. I ordered a small fireproof box and placed all physical copies of my medical records, legal documents, and printouts from my blog into it. I labeled the folders. I didn't want chaos. I wanted everything in order. Because from now on, I was the one in control of my recovery, not them. Treatment started quietly. My oncologist began me on a combination of chemotherapy and immunotherapy, calling it a cautious but proactive approach. Since the leukemia had been caught early, even with the delay, I still had strong odds. The first session lasted most of the afternoon. My best friend came with me and sat in the chair beside mine with her laptop open, working silently while I stared at the IV line and counted ceiling tiles. My work colleague met us afterward with dinner and a list of notes from a project meeting I had missed. He'd taken over my accounts temporarily so I wouldn't need to stress about anything during appointments. 2 other coworkers volunteered to donate their unused sick days so I could take extra leave without affecting my pay. Human Resources approved it the same day. A few hours after I got home from my second round, my landlord knocked on the door. She had heard about my diagnosis from one of the tenants and offered to waive 2 months of rent. Her sister had gone through something similar, she explained, and she wanted to help however she could. I thanked her and added a reminder on my phone to send her an anonymous thank you gift later. That same evening, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring out. When I played the voicemail, I heard the voice of a family friend, one who had always stayed close with my mother. She said she'd heard there was trouble and urged me to call my parents, said I was being harsh, said I should consider forgiveness. I blocked her number without replying. Later that week, I found a flyer for a local support group at the clinic. It was specifically for young adults going through cancer treatment. I showed up one evening and sat quietly at first, listening. There were maybe 8 of us. Some had just started treatment. Others were nearly finished. One girl had lost her job right after her diagnosis. Another was still attending classes through the nausea. By the time the meeting ended, I felt more grounded than I had in weeks. One of the girls from the group introduced me to a patient advocate who worked with nonprofits that helped people access medication discounts and workplace protection resources. We met over coffee, and she walked me through how to get assistance with prescription costs. She also connected me with a legal aid group that specialized in job-related discrimination. I wasn't in trouble yet, but she said it was best to get ahead of it. I spent the weekend writing letters to 2 of my younger cousins. They weren't part of the cover-up. I had no reason to believe they knew what had happened. I didn't name names. I just explained the facts, the diagnosis, the delay, the silence. I said I wasn't angry with them, but I didn't want them to hear a twisted version later and wonder why I never said anything. I sealed the envelopes and mailed them out myself. The next day, I opened my email and saw a message from my father. The subject line was my name. The body of the email was short. He accused me of embarrassing the family. He demanded I take down my blog post before people started talking. I didn't reply. I forwarded the message to my lawyer. She read it and offered to draft a cease and desist letter, not as a threat of legal action, but as a formal boundary. The letter stated that further attempts to contact me or interfere with my medical care would be documented and treated as harassment. I printed it out and placed it in a small frame on my desk. A reminder that I wasn't imagining the danger. I was just refusing to ignore it. At my next treatment, the nurse pulled me aside and said my blood numbers were improving, not dramatically, but noticeably. I bought a charm bracelet that night. Nothing fancy. Just a plain silver chain with a single charm, a tiny bandage. For each milestone, I plan to add another, one for the diagnosis, one for starting treatment, one for this first progress update. I also restarted journaling. 10 minutes every night, no filters. Just what happened that day, who showed up, what I learned. I wasn't looking for deep meaning. I just wanted a record in case the fog of treatment ever made things blurry later. The biggest shock came on a Thursday morning. I had just finished my 4th session and was heading home when I got a call from the front desk at the hospital. Someone had come by asking for me. A woman. Tall woman. She didn't give a full name at first, But when asked for ID, she showed her driver's license. It was my mother. By that point, I had already updated my restricted contact list with every hospital I worked with. The receptionist recognized the name from the list and followed the protocol. She refused entry, documented the attempt, and called to inform me. I forwarded the information to my lawyer, then returned to the hospital the next day with a printed photo of my mother. I asked for it to be added to my patient file under restricted visitors. They scanned it and uploaded it instantly. The nurse nodded without comment. This wasn't the first time they'd seen something like this. I left the hospital that day with a new charm in my pocket, a tiny padlock. I'd earned it. About 3 weeks into treatment, I received a message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She apologized for not reaching out sooner and said she had only just learned the truth after overhearing a phone call between her parents and mine. According to her, my mother had been telling the extended family that I was exaggerating my condition for sympathy. She even claimed there had never been a formal diagnosis, only suspicious test results that I had blown out of proportion. The cousin sent me screenshots from a group chat. In one of them, my aunt, the same aunt who was told about my diagnosis before me, called me dramatic and accused me of playing sick to avoid responsibility. It wasn't even coded or subtle, just straight up slander in a thread of laughing emojis and passive-aggressive jabs. I forwarded the screenshots to my lawyer right away. She saved them into the file she had already started compiling. She said it wasn't defamation yet, but if they pushed further into public lies, we could take action. I then contacted the hospital and asked for another round of updates to my privacy settings. I requested that every single member of my extended family, by name, be added to the restricted list. No phone calls, no updates, no visits, no third-party inquiries. The administrative assistant flagged my account and forwarded the request to compliance. That same week, one of the nurses casually mentioned that my mother had tried calling again. She had identified herself as my emergency contact, claiming there had been a mistake in the system, but my chart already had notes and alerts. The call triggered a red flag, and the nurse reported the incident. I booked a meeting with the hospital compliance officer to make the ban more formal. Together, we added a written notice to my file about impersonation attempts and misinformation risks. It now required verbal and photo ID verification for any inquiries or visits. Around that time, a journalist I had known in college reached out. She had seen my blog and asked if I'd consider being part of a feature on medical autonomy, especially in situations involving family overreach. I said yes, as long as my name wasn't used and no direct identifiers were included. She agreed. 2 weeks later, the article was published. It quoted portions of my blog and outlined my story, carefully anonymized but clear in the message. The article was shared widely in advocacy circles. A few days after it went live, I got an email from a woman working with a nonprofit that focused on health law and patient rights. She offered to give me a free consultation. We spoke for nearly an hour. She walked me through steps to take control over all future care, not just with this hospital, but with every provider I had ever visited. I drafted a formal letter that same day and started mailing it to every clinic, every urgent care, and every specialist's office I'd ever been to. A few days later, I got a message from a former neighbor. She said she ran into my mother at the grocery store and was shocked by how upset she seemed. According to her, my mother had been going around telling people I had cut her off for no reason and that I was going through a personal crisis. That same week, I found a card in my mailbox with my father's handwriting on the front. Inside was a note, 3 paragraphs long, not apologizing, not asking questions, but accusing me of hurting the family name and causing a rift that would haunt me someday. I didn't hesitate. I shredded the card, vacuum sealed the envelope, and threw it out. I made a personal rule that any future physical mail from them wouldn't be opened. From now on, I'd handle it like a health hazard: gloves, scissors, trash bag. No emotional entry points. A few days after that, I received an email from one of my old college professors. She said she had seen the article and immediately thought of me. She didn't know it was my story at first, but as she read further, she made the connection. She told me she admired the steps I was taking and asked if I'd be interested in speaking with a medical advocacy organization she was loosely affiliated with. They focused on helping young adults navigate healthcare in situations where family dynamics created barriers. I told her yes. The next morning, I added another charm to my bracelet, a tiny book. One for truth, one for exposure, one for my voice finally being louder than their lies. I went to a grocery store I'd never shopped at before, a quiet one in a different part of the city, hoping for a peaceful errand. I was waiting in line with my basket when I heard my name called out behind me. I turned slowly and saw my brother standing just a few feet away. He gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes and acted like he had just bumped into me by chance. He held a basket too, half empty, and started chatting like we hadn't cut ties. I asked him how he even knew I came here. He shrugged and said someone must have mentioned it. There was no chance that was true. I hadn't told anyone outside of my best friend and my colleague where I shopped, and I had been intentionally choosing new places to avoid encounters like this. He kept trying to talk, moving from awkward small talk into guilt-laced lines about how our parents were losing sleep, how the family was falling apart, how I was making things harder for everyone. I didn't answer. I walked straight up to the cashier, asked for the manager, and told him I felt unsafe. I explained I was being harassed by someone I had a restraining situation against and needed to be escorted to my car. The manager didn't hesitate. He signaled to another staff member and walked me to the parking lot while my brother trailed behind us. He raised his voice as we walked, shouting that I was selfish, that I loved attention, and that I was trying to ruin our family's name for sympathy. A couple of other shoppers turned and stared. I didn't look back. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove off without checking the mirror. When I got home, I called my lawyer and told her everything that had happened. She said it was time to file a formal police report, not just notes and records. We made an appointment the next morning. I documented everything: date, time, location, the comments he made, the fact that he somehow found out where I was shopping despite no public information being available. 2 days later, my building's security guard caught me in the lobby and handed me a copy of the visitor log. My mother had tried to visit again, giving her name at the front desk. She was turned away without being allowed to go up. I attached that log to the growing file and emailed it to my lawyer, who added it to the ongoing police record. My best friend came over later that night with a small box in her hand, an indoor security camera. She had looked it up, bought it, and brought it to me without even waiting for me to ask. We installed it that same night above my front door. It had motion detection, night vision, and a cloud backup system, just in case. The next morning, I got a motion alert while I was getting ready for treatment. I opened the app and saw footage from around midnight, my aunt, pacing in front of my building's entrance, checking her phone every few minutes. She never tried to enter but stayed just long enough for it to be more than coincidence. I saved the footage and sent it to building management. They added her to the restricted list immediately and confirmed in writing that none of them would be allowed entry under any circumstances. That night, I updated my blog again. Not to vent, but to explain what was happening. I made it clear I was being stalked. I said it wasn't just a misunderstanding or a disagreement, it was escalating. I left out names again. I stayed factual. But I made sure the people following my story understood that this wasn't harmless. This wasn't about drama. This was about safety. Within a few hours, 3 private messages came in from people who had read the blog. Each one told a different version of the same experience. One had been isolated by her father after refusing a family-arranged treatment. Another was threatened with eviction for trying to go no contact with a parent. One woman said her sister had hidden a serious illness from her because she thought bad news wasn't worth sharing. I read them, saved them, and replied with thanks. No advice, no comparison, just acknowledgement. And then I opened the app again and checked the footage a second time. The timestamp, the way my aunt lingered, the way she looked around like she was waiting for someone to open the door from inside. I took another charm from the box on my dresser and added it to the bracelet, this one shaped like an eye. It's for awareness, it's for protection, for proof. I got an email from a high school teacher I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. She had come across the article and wanted to confirm that it was me. She said it was shocking to read because she remembered my mother always talking about how healthy and private our family was. She also said something else, something that made me freeze mid-scroll. My mother had been telling people in our old community that I had run away from home and gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd. I forwarded the email to my lawyer. She responded within the hour and started drafting a preliminary defamation notice. It wasn't for filing yet, but she wanted a document ready in case these rumors started affecting my reputation professionally. She also logged the email into the evidence file she was maintaining, adding it to the folder labeled Community Misrepresentation. A few days later, the journalist who had written the original article reached out again. She said there had been overwhelming interest in a follow-up story, one that specifically focused on the issue of medical gaslighting by family members. She asked if I would be willing to go on record this time. After thinking about it, I said yes. I allowed the use of my first name and approved a photo of me taken in the hospital during one of my earlier treatments, with my face blurred but clearly me. The follow-up article went live 2 weeks later. It gained traction much faster than the first one. Within a few days, it had over 100,000 shares and thousands of comments. Dozens of readers messaged me privately, many sharing similar experiences of being lied to, isolated, or ignored by family members while dealing with life-threatening conditions. Some offered to connect me with local support groups. One woman said her father had hidden her biopsy results for months, convinced it would scare her too much. Among the comments, a former family friend posted something that stood out. She said she had gone to my parents' house after reading the article and confronted them directly. According to her, they stuck to their story, that I was overreacting, that I had always been emotional, and that I was refusing love out of stubbornness. But she didn't believe them anymore. She messaged me privately, apologized for ever doubting me, and offered to give a formal statement if I ever needed support in court. A few days later, I got another call from the nonprofit health law group that had helped me earlier. This time, it wasn't about legal action. They said a donor had read my story and wanted to sponsor me for a private recovery retreat, but 10 days at a secure facility that focused on trauma recovery and medical patient privacy. I accepted the offer. The retreat center verified every guest, logged all activity, and allowed 0 outside visitors without clearance. At the retreat, I met with a trauma therapist every morning. We worked through something called betrayal trauma. The sessions focused on what happens when people you're supposed to trust the most are the ones who take your choices away. We also worked through the emotional consequences of having medical decisions made behind your back. One session hit harder than the rest. I wasn't crying because of the diagnosis. I had made peace with that. What hit me was realizing how long I had been trying to earn a kind of love from my family that was never unconditional to begin with. Not when silence and control had always come first. I met another woman at the retreat who had been through something eerily familiar. Her sister had hidden her cancer diagnosis from her out of shame, and she only found out after the treatment window had nearly closed. She had been fighting alone for 3 years before getting support. We bonded quickly, swapped numbers, and agreed to check in with each other weekly once the retreat ended. When the 10 days were over, I returned home. I felt raw, like a layer had been peeled off, but I also felt steady. I unpacked slowly, restocked my fridge, and then finally turned on my phone. I had a few missed messages and some notifications, but one stood out. It was from an unknown number. The message read, "You've made this harder than it had to be." I blocked the number instantly and reported it. Then I added another charm to the bracelet on my nightstand. This one was shaped like a flame, not because I was angry, but because sometimes the only way to stop a cycle is to burn it down completely and walk out alive. I filed the police report the same day the last message came in. I brought printouts of the message, previous call logs, hospital security footage, and copies of the cease and desist letter. My lawyer met me at the station and walked the officer through the timeline. She suggested filing for a restraining order immediately. I agreed. We submitted everything to the court the following morning. A week later, the court granted a 6-month no-contact order. It included all 4 family members: my mother, father, brother, and aunt. The terms banned physical approach, phone calls, emails, and any communication through third parties. Digital contact was also prohibited, including social media, messaging apps, and burner accounts. A violation would mean legal consequences, no exceptions. That weekend, I changed my phone number and deleted my old email address. I gave the new number to only 2 people, my best friend and my colleague. We all started using an encrypted messaging app that logged no external data. I added 2-step authentication to everything and reviewed every privacy setting I could find, from food delivery apps to my pharmacy's online portal. On Monday morning, my building manager knocked on my door. She told me she had read the article and had quietly flagged my unit for priority relocation. One had just opened up 2 floors above. She offered it to me without any lease transfer fees. I accepted immediately. That weekend, my best friend and 2 coworkers came over, and we boxed up everything I wanted to keep. Everything else, photos, furniture, decorations that reminded me of my family, was left behind or donated. The new apartment had the same layout, but it felt like a reset. I set up my space with calm colors and no reminders of the past. The security system was updated, including the camera at the door. I installed blackout curtains and placed a new charm on the bracelet, a small key, for the new locks. For the new start. Later that week, I received an email from one of the nonprofits I'd worked with during treatment. They were organizing a closed seminar for healthcare professionals about familial coercion in adult patients and wanted me to speak. I agreed. The event was in a conference room downtown with around 40 doctors, nurses, and care coordinators in attendance. I shared everything, from the call that was intercepted to the impersonation attempts in the campaign to discredit me. I explained how easily it could have been swept under the rug if one nurse hadn't taken the time to double-check my chart. At the end of my talk, 4 nurses and 2 doctors came up to thank me. One doctor pulled me aside and said he had once dismissed a young woman's medical concerns because her parents seemed loving but firm. She never came back. A week later, I had my final follow-up with my oncologist. She walked in with a huge smile and handed me a printed report. My tests were clear. I was officially in remission. She hugged me and told me I had fought harder than most, and did it without a support system that should have been there. I celebrated that night with a dinner at my apartment. My best friend helped me prep the food, my colleague brought drinks, my retreat friend flew in from out of state, and my lawyer even stopped by for dessert. I handed each of them a handwritten letter I had written earlier that week. Each letter thanked them for something specific they had done, something that helped me feel seen and safe while I rebuilt my life. None of them were related to me by blood, but they had shown me more care than my family ever had. After the dinner, I sat down with my therapist and wrote a final letter to my family. I didn't write it to send, I wrote it to release. I poured in every word I had held back, every unanswered question, every moment I had begged for honesty. I folded the pages, placed them in a small metal bowl on my balcony, and lit a match. I watched the pages curl and turn black. When the last piece turned to ash, I went inside and closed the door. 3 days later, I received a message from a cousin I barely spoke to. She said my mother had been hospitalized for anxiety and exhaustion. I didn't reply. I didn't post about it. I didn't check for updates. I had left that version of my life behind, and I had no intention of reopening the door. That night, I sat down and wrote one last blog entry. It was short. It didn't name anyone. It didn't ask for sympathy. It just told the truth. They hid my diagnosis to avoid drama. I gave them silence in return, but I gave myself the life they never could, one rooted in truth, not control. I chose healing. I chose me.